Welcome to Retro Gaming Radio. I'm Shane Armino, your host. Comprehensive online. I'm Shane Armino, your host. Welcome to Retro Gaming Radio. Comprehensive online. I'm Shane Armino, your host. Welcome to the program.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the second follow-up show of Retro Gaming Radio. Our first show was a big success, and we're happy to be back with you for yet another show. This episode's very, very busy. We have a 24-minute interview with the great 8-bit programmer Paul Norman. Now, if that name rings a bell, it should. He's the genius behind Forbidden Forest, Caverns of Khafka, Aztec Challenge, Super Huey, and it goes on and on. We have a great interview with him. I'm sure you're going to enjoy that a lot. So, as I promised myself, I'd keep the show under 30 minutes. We're going to try to keep that, and I'm going to not do an editorial, but I do want to bring you up to date on a couple little last-minute snippets of information. First off, I want to tell you a little bit about Daphne, the Laserdisc emulator. I know what you're thinking, emulator, Laserdisc, why would that be of interest to me? Well, as you know, Dragon's Lair, Space Ace, Thayer's Quest, Cliffhanger, Us vs. Them, tons and tons of classic 80s games were ran off of Laserdisc. Now, what Daphne attempts to do is to recreate, using the original Dragon's Lair, Space Ace, whatever, ROM set, in conjunction with a Laserdisc player plugged into your computer to let you basically emulate Dragon's Lair on your PC. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Shane, there's been DVD versions, there's been CD-ROM versions, there's been all sorts of different platforms of it. So what makes this any different? Well, everything that you've played up till now has been a recreation, a best guess, simulated. What Daphne is an actual emulator. You actually have to have the Dragon's Lair ROMs. Now, how does this work for people who don't have a Laserdisc player? Well, the guys at the Daphne project were nice enough to include MPEG-2 support. I know, and you're starting to see where I'm going with this. If you own the Digital Leisure Dragon's Lair DVD-ROM, not the DVD video, if you own the ROM version, you can strip those MP2s, those video files and sound files off of the Dragon's Lair's DVD and rip them to your hard drive and then play them inside of Daphne. This is totally cool. For those of you who are die-hard Dragon's Lair fans, you know that none of the recreations to date have been exactly right. The feel's wrong, the timing's wrong. It's cool, but it's not quite accurate. This version of Dragon's Lair will blow you away. It is so accurate. The feeling of it is just amazing. Now, granted, when you rip those MPEG files off of your Digital Leisure disc, it's going to suck up a gigabyte of your hard drive. And I'll tell you, Daphne is a pig. You need a very, very fast processor, lots of RAM, lots of video RAM. The system we're using it on here is a P3 866, 512 megs of RAM, 32 megs of video, and we're playing it off a SCSI drive just to make sure we have maximum CPU time available. And let me tell you, it plays like a dream. It plays in a window or full screen. You can set all the dip switches and all sorts of parameters regarding the game. So you have to insert more coins to continue at a different point. Suffice to say, this is the most realistic version of Dragon's Lair you will ever play. It's possible by going to the Daphne emulator site, which is daphne-emu.com. So get the emulator. There should be links from there where you can get the program that will convert your Dragon's Lair disc into MPEGs that allow you to use them inside of Daphne. There's lots of help, facts, and tons of people around who will help you out. Suffice to say, if you're a Dragon's Lair fan, you can't be without it. Now, on another note, and I'm almost out of time already before we have to do our interview, another note is Digital Leisure themselves are going to re-release a PC version, that's CD-ROM, not DVD, just any PC version of Dragon's Lair that actually has it playing inside of a Dragon's Lair cabinet on your screen. You can set the dip switches, you can do all the emulation stuff, it's got a scoreboard. Basically, outside of emulation, direct emulation like Daphne does, this is the most realistic version of Dragon's Lair ever created. And Digital Leisure has just released a press release about that, and I should be getting a copy for review pretty soon. And that being the case, of course, the next episode, or possibly the one after that if we run out of time, we'll have a review of this new PC version of Dragon's Lair. I personally can't wait. Hopefully also in the near future, we're also going to be looking at the Intellivision Rocks and Intellivision emulation package for your PC and Mac. With all that said, we really should just get right on to the interview. So here's our interview with Paul Norman, Commodore 64 8-bit programmer extraordinaire. Our guest today is Mr. Paul Norman. Most of you know him from his fame at Cosmi, making great 8-bit classics that most of us grew up with, like Forbidden Forest and Caverns of Khafka and Super Huey, just to name a few. Thank you so much, Paul, for coming in. The listeners have been wanting an interview with you for some time. I'm really glad we had a chance to sit down and talk like this. You know, many classic gamers know of your involvement with Cosmi, and some of us historical freaks always like to know what happened before people got famous, and I think I can call you famous. Can you give us some background on yourself before you started working at Cosmi?
Paul Norman, BC. All right. First of all, thank you, Shane, for inviting me. It's both flattering and a little disturbing to know that there are people who still want to hear about something I did almost 20 years ago, but why not? If I remember correctly, I've been a musician. Started playing the guitar when I was 13, and did little other than that for the next 15 or so years. I had several bands. I worked in studios, wrote songs. I played concerts for, KRLA, Casey Kasem. I played everywhere from the Corral in Topanga Canyon to the Hollywood Bowl. Owned a small club in Hermosa Beach where we played regularly, and we hosted bands like Chicago, Steppenwolf, sort of thing. Took up most of the 70s, actually.
You know, many people, including myself, believe that you were Cosmi, that you founded the company to publish your games. However, I know now that you were just an employee of Cosmi, not the founder. I thought it was kind of funny that nobody at the Cosmi booth at E3 had ever heard of you. How did you hook up with Cosmi to begin with?
I'm sure I wouldn't know most of the people at the Cosmi booth these days either. But anyway, by 1980, disco had pretty much cleared out live bands, and I was more interested in just composing music by then. However, being a diehard sci-fi lover, I naturally had to buy the first computer that came along. That was a Commodore VIC-20, a remarkable machine. Now and then when I'm getting a GIF image ready for the web, I sometimes think back that this tiny picture uses more memory than that computer had in it. Since I balanced my checkbook in my pocket and had no recipes to catalog, I, of course, started writing games on the thing as a reason to learn BASIC. 2 or 3 months later, I spot a classified ad for game programmers. This was around 82. Who knew what qualified as a game programmer? I knew BASIC, period. But I went out there, it was about 50 miles from me, and watched another guy demo his blackjack game. Just letters and numbers on a green screen, pretty exciting stuff. And then I showed them my asteroid game. I had color-textured asteroids, different sizes, flying down the screen, while you guided your little rocket ship out of the way or blasted the asteroids with laser beams. It was all written in BASIC, which I admitted, but they kept asking me if I had used any machine language. Not knowing what machine language was, I, of course, said no. They asked me if I knew machine language. I, of course, said yes. I was hired and spent the next 3 months in a small windowless room with 2 old guys, aerospace engineers, I think. I was paid enough to buy the gas to commute. The first day, they handed me a C-64. Never saw one before. So they had an idea for a guy with a bow and arrow shooting balloons. It had to be all machine language. Then they left. So I learned 6502 by creating Forbidden Forest. It was about half finished when these guys went belly up, and Cosmi came in to buy the furniture. Since I was still sitting at my table working, they bought me too.
As far as I know, Forbidden Forest was your first most popular game, maybe Super Huey doing better in sales. As you mentioned in an email, it's amazing how a forest so forbidden keeps coming up. Did you ever expect Forbidden Forest to be so timeless? What do you personally attribute to its success and status as an 8-bit legend?
Well, in the first place, I think it did better in Europe than elsewhere because the setting, fit more within their mythology. But in general, I believe it was well received because it didn't follow any of the existing formulas. And there was a simple reason for this. I didn't play video games, and I didn't know any of the formulas. See, I think a lot of game programmers were computer programmers first, doing things like math and engineering and accounting, and this causes the game to conform to programming practices rather than forcing the programmer to do whatever the game demands. I had no formal training in computers or programming, and as I said, I didn't play games. Maybe Frogger once in a while. I like movies and music, so I tried to make a movie and learn the programming by finding ways to do it with the code. So I think people got in this funny little form the same qualities you expect from movies: action, adventure, mystery, humor, music, violence. And of course, in movies, the sun goes down and the moon comes out, and monsters growl and scream and people bleed. The problem with creating from an engineering point of view for me is that most of those things I just mentioned aren't really necessary. To play Pong or Pac-Man or Missile Command, all you need is an objective and a mechanism for achieving it.
The new generation of gamers really don't understand what video games were like way back when. With today's huge software houses with teams of dozens or more people working on games in parallel, it's quite easy to forget that most 8-bit authors were really a one-man band. Now, to my knowledge, you did all your games on your own: graphics, programming, music, sound effects, etc., and they were really good. Granted, there isn't as much work in generating 8-bit graphics as there is in 16-bit color high-res graphics, but all the same, your development cycle must have been hell. How does one man going about doing it all on his own like that?
It's perfectly true. I did everything myself, and, for me, it's actually the only way to go. You hear all the time about the struggle to maintain one's creative vision while working in collaboration. There's only two ways you can achieve that. One, having enough power to force others to carry out your vision, or two, work alone. That's the philosophy anyway. The reality is that there was no one else at Cosmi to do any part, even if I had wanted help. Truth is, I don't really like people that much and prefer to work alone. As long as you're prepared to take both the credit and the blame, I think it's the best way. It is for me anyway. As for making C64 games as a one-man band, you're right in that it was a lot more limited in what was possible. Background graphics had to wrap after about 8 pages, each page or screen being about 4K, trying to make something interesting out of 8 colors. There were 16 colors, but you could only use 8 if you wanted to have transparent sprites. But anyway, you make as much graphic material as you possibly can while leaving enough memory for the operating code and, of course, for me, the music. It is these very limitations that bring out the creativity.
Forbidden Forest was named in the top 50 C64 games of all time, and well-deserving. To the modern gamer, it may not be apparently obvious how much work and innovation went into Forbidden Forest. Contextual music changes, not even really realized on the PC until the first Wing Commander game. Environmental changes, lifelike parallax scrolling, and a real showmanship that wasn't really realized until Cinemaware came along and showed the world what a game with a theatrical flair could be. And your games had that already. Not to mention, Forbidden Forest scared the living crap out of me. The Demogorgon mainly, the thunder and the lightning, and totally intense. Anyway, the screams of the ghosts, the thumping sounds of frogs squashing your body. Every part of the game screams, the man who made me really loves me. Was Forbidden Forest a game with passion as it would seem, or was it just an assignment from Cosmi?
I think showmanship just comes from trying to enjoy the show yourself, even if you're in it. I think it's more boring than watching performers go through routines, thinking nothing but step 1, step 2, step 3, kick. For example, you mentioned the skeletons. You can have the skeletons run out at the player, and if they hit him, they all disappear, and the sign pops up, game over. All the requirements to play the game are satisfied, but the emotions are left completely unsatisfied. However, add some totally unnecessary things like screaming, stabbing, bleeding, scary music, and you're appealing then directly to the gut. See, I would be sitting there hour after hour trying to get this little bit to work right. Then I would need a kick to reward myself, and that's where extra touches come in. Now, that's the subjective reason for doing more, but I think it's absolutely indispensable in any good entertainment. You see it all the time in the best movies and hear it in the best music when the performers or creators are really emotionally getting off on what they're doing.
Speaking of Cosmi again, how much free reign did they give you in the development of your games? Everybody remembers Forbidden Forest, but let's face it, you've had some real gems like Aztec Challenge, Caverns of Khafka, fantastic music, by the way, and I loved the game up until I figured out I could fly, and the game lost a bit of its appeal. And Slinky, not to mention blockbuster hits like Super Huey. I think I could almost tell which of your games were assignments and which one were the Paul Norman classics. Could you give us a little idea of the development of these games?
I had complete freedom to come up with anything I wanted. This was mostly uncharted territory as far as public perception, and of course the business types at Cosmi had no clue what was good or bad until they saw it. Not to say that is in any way unique in the entertainment business. I was inspired by all the movies I had seen before and continue to see. I never looked at other games for ideas, and I never actually had an assignment. Just 3 games a year. That's all we ask.
I understand that you weren't very pleased with having to write a flight sim, and Cosmi all but insisted that you did, the result being Super Huey. Could we have a little background story on this event?
Flight simulators were the latest thing, and to that extent, Cosmi wanted to tap into it. They were really in no position to insist. But anyway, I found reality sims were very intriguing and moved in that direction later. But airplanes were inherently boring. Even pilots will tell you that all the excitement is taking off, landing, and crashing. So naturally, I'd seen Blue Thunder and Airwolf on television and knew the helicopter was far more appealing. I should mention the name Huey was not my choice. But what's the name? So I made it more stupid by adding Super, as lucky people didn't think it was a giant baby duck simulator. It did very well because it was the first helo sim, and obviously a lot of people agreed with me that helicopters were more fun to fly. However, I did put so much effort into the realistic mechanics of the craft that there wasn't much time or space to do a good job on the adventures. As a matter of fact, I got a letter from a guy in South Africa who was using Super Huey as an instructional tool at his flying school. No wonder they never became a superpower.
Beyond Forbidden Forest, the second part of Forbidden Forest didn't get met with nearly the reception that the original did, despite its incredible technology advances, the, quote, 4D perspective, where you could actually walk into the forest, not just run left and right. Did the game sell well? Were you pleased with the outcome of the game?
I don't really like going back to things, but I suppose I was a bit burned by that time, so I went along with the sequel idea. I think I did everything bigger, better, brighter, bloodier. I am proud of that full-screen animated Hydra in the cave, though. But like in any sequel, the inspiration is gone. You're just trying to make what you did before better, what you think you would have done had you had more time. But the initial feeling isn't really there, and it comes across as detached and unspontaneous. I did discover some new things about C64 while trying to exceed the original, like how to use the hidden RAM. There was another 20K of memory sitting below the ROM at the same address. On a very small scale, it's like I was saying before, more resources do not necessarily produce better results.
Your games always had flair, panache, and an air of prominent originality. Even in a game where originality ruled and not everybody was licensing out the same first-person shooter gaming engine and slapping a new coat of paint on it. Well, it isn't hard to guess that Caverns of Khafka was inspired by Indiana Jones and the like, and Slinky was a brilliant Q*bert-inspired game. Other games like Aztec Challenge and Forbidden Forest seem to come straight out of that creative area of the Paul Norman brain. What inspired your games?
As I said, movies are my primary enjoyment, and thus they play a large part. Forbidden Forest is inspired by films like Jason and the Argonauts and Mysterious Island, Caverns of Khafka, not Indiana Jones. Did that come before? But from things like Journey to the Center of the Earth, The Lost World, Land of the Pharaohs, many others. You know, I don't really mean there's a direct correlation. These are movies I'd seen since childhood, and that which affected me is recorded on my Cortex. Cortex, the automatic brain recorder from Ronco. If you think about it, there really is no such thing as originality. It's a rehashing of bits and pieces from many sources, some clear, some vague, reconstructed by the brain in a new mix. The brain's very good at making sense out of seemingly random parts. It's great storytelling. The music was inspired by me, again based on all that had come before, movie soundtracks, of course, being early favorites. I must say at this point there is no one greater than Miklos Rosa. And for those who don't know the name, he scored just about every period epic ever heard of, like Ben-Hur, El Cid, King of Kings, on and on and on. As for the details of the games, I can only reiterate, I tried to amuse myself while doing it. There are only two ingredients required for me, humor and suspense. Humor is not hard. You just do something unexpected or silly at an inappropriate time. Suspense is very hard. Hitchcock pointed out that suspense is not surprise, as is so often used today in thrillers. It's full knowledge of what can or will happen if you don't stop it within a fixed period of time. Surprises can be thrown in to slow you down while you're trying to achieve your goal, but it's that ultimate event that drives you emotionally. An example is Aztec Challenge that you mentioned. A series of very simple maneuvers that have a fixed duration. You can be killed at any time by various things, but the suspense builds because if you can just hang on, the escape is coming up any second now.
Paul, a lot of us consider you the godfather of 8-bit games, despite the press that other designers like Doug Smith, Lode Runner, and Jordan Mechner, Prince of Persia, Bill Budge, Pinball Construction Set, were the ones that really set the bar for gaming. Frankly, I think Forbidden Forest was a landmark in gaming and set the future of gaming in motion. I think a lot of people see you as a programmer, but probably gloss over the obvious musical talent you possess. Let's face it, Caverns of Khafka and Forbidden Forest had phenomenal soundtracks. I really like the intro music on Super Huey as well. Tell us about Paul Norman the musician.
I say with pride, I am not a programmer. I am a human being. I don't think like a programmer. I do have the discipline to deal with minute detail, but I much prefer the big picture, the end result. One valuable lesson to be learned from coding 8-bit limited memory is efficiency. You just don't have the room to do what you want, so you're constantly trimming and reworking and rethinking to shorten the code and still achieve the same result. And that experience has come in very handy for the web, and writing fast, efficient code gives you more time to devote to the things that viewers actually see. As for the music, I'm a musician, always have been. It's the most satisfying thing I do, and any entertainment without a musical component to me is dead. Music is the sound or language of emotion. It brings it out, enhances it. It zips right past the brain and grabs you where the real you is hiding, if you let it, that is.
Paul, tell us about life at Cosmi. Did they pay you well? I understand you weren't always happy there, nor they with you, probably towards the end. I appreciate the fact that nearly every game they released was budget priced. In fact, I own them all, too. But were you able to make a good living there? Feel free to throw in any good Cosmi stories here.
Cosmi is a name without meaning, started by two guys of a similar nature. I really didn't interact with them much. I turned out games at home. They sent me checks. As it turned out, they made far more money from my work than I did. I can't knock them for that. It's all they desired in life. As for me, I'm a lousy businessman. Definitely the type who needs an agent because I just can't get interested in that kind of thing. As long as I'm comfortable and allowed to create on my own, I don't go around demanding more, even if it's my fair share. I think I'm a success as a human being. I have no major traumas or issues to speak of. I have a pretty fair understanding of the universe, and I'm perfectly content with myself. But from a societal point of view, I have to admit this comes with a price, lack of ambition. But ask any musician of any level of success who gets 2 cents on every record if he thinks his contribution to the record was 2%. Businessmen making vastly more than artists is not a new story. That's why you have to be a superstar before you see any real money. Do I have any Cosmi stories? Yes. George, you still owe me money.
I understand some Paul Norman games were ported to other platforms. Did you do the ports yourself? What other systems got the games and which ones got ported? I remember seeing some Atari 8-bit game called Forbidden Forest, but it definitely wasn't the same as yours.
Short answer, I assisted a few of the ports, but I didn't do the work. The IBM PC was just coming around by the time I left Cosmi, and they hired somebody for that after my departure. Believe me, that was no game machine.
After you left Cosmi, where did you go? I don't believe I've seen anything from you after Cosmi.
After Cosmi, I went to a company that was pioneering CD-ROM games. Their chief engineer there was a guy who had ported Super Huey to the Amiga, and they'd made a bit of a splash in Japan with a mystery game that was mostly live audio with some comic book pictures. They were looking for another one like that, so I found myself doing a strange thing, which I'd never done before, writing a script, basically a radio drama. It was a 1930s haunted house with a murder mystery. Again, I drew from everything, from Bob Hope movies to cheesy ghost stories, just whatever was in my entertainment memory bank there. And to keep myself amused, I decided to make it funny. There were 12 human characters, about 40 different ghosts, 4 hours of dialogue in all. I twisted every pun, wordplay, cliche. I had a great white hunter cooking in a native pot, a lot of suggestive female ghosts. My favorite was a giant parrot with a peg leg and an eye patch with a little pirate on his shoulder. I then rehearsed the actors and guided the recording of the dialogue. These were all Hollywood pros, if not big names, and that was great fun. It was the closest I've ever come to enjoying my own work as an audience. The best part was that I composed the musical soundtrack, scored the whole play with original stuff, and did the final mix down. It was great. By the way, it was called Murder Makes Strange Dead Fellows, contributed by my friend Gary. I put a version of it on web TV in around 95 for a while, and it was pretty popular. I might do it again if I can get the rights to it.
Do you still write games? Even if they're just for yourself, are there any unreleased Paul Norman games the world missed out on?
I haven't written a game since Deadfellows, not in any real way. I worked for Sega for a while. I developed several ideas, 2 of which I may do one day, but they didn't involve little blue things jumping over little orange things or blasting everything in sight, so Sega and I didn't really hit it off. I produced new classics like Home Alone 2 and designed Biker Mice from Mars. Hey, Jesus. It was just work. Then, of course, I got trapped in the web of the Internet, which meandered around for a few years, dragging me with it. Very little was accomplished aside from making money on projects that rarely got off the ground. And, of course, I sold my services to an e-commerce site at the end of the 90s, trying to do what I could to make that original, but originality was the last thing they wanted. They eventually went the way of most .coms.
What are your feelings about the new Forbidden Forest 3D remake? Did you have any hand in that?
I don't know anything about Cosmi, what they're doing, or the remake of any stuff of mine.
Last question, Paul. I know you're a busy guy. Do you still play computer games? Oftentimes you hear a lot of the old classic 8-bit programmers that are out there don't even program anymore. They're doing multimedia, or they're working construction. I mean, you'd think that they would have pursued programming further on. What do you like in video games if you still play them? Do you still play games emulated?
The only game I've found interesting in the past decade is Descent. Besides the movement being very good, it had that element of suspense I was talking about before. Because you could sneak up on things, make up your own strategies, either stealth or blasting. And I hate things that are fixed, intractable. Just set up a general scenario and let the player make it happen however he wants. Sure, I program all the time, and of course now it's Java, JavaScript, HTML, PHP. Flash has potential. Since the money grubbers have bit the cyber dust and the internet is once again floundering around for a new identity, I've decided the next thing to try is giving it one. I think it's a very unique medium in many ways, and my interest remains entertainment, so I'm trying to come up with some new forms. It has to be by nature quite different, while retaining the fundamentals that people have always responded to. I'm starting small by launching my own site on July 1st. It will be part self-promotional, part services. One has to eat. But there will be entertainment development, and perhaps it will attract some interest to make bigger things possible. If anyone is interested, just surf over to medievalreds.com. That's MEDIEVALREDS. Well, that's pretty much my story so far. Thanks again, Shane, for the opportunity. I hope I can come up with something that all you adults who played my games as kids can find equally, if more maturely, stimulating.
Thank you once again, Paul Norman, for being with us. Of course, Paul Norman is one of my heroes. He always has been one of my heroes. In fact, without people like Paul Norman and Don Bluth and people that really inspired the generation, a lot of us wouldn't have become programmers to begin with. Playing games like Forbidden Forest, cutting-edge games like Forbidden Forest and Dragon's Lair, things like that, those are really what spawned me into wanting to program and make games. So, again, that was one of the highlights of Retro Gaming Radio, was to be able to meet Paul Norman and be able to do this interview. So that, folks, is going to wrap up this episode of Retro Gaming Radio. I hope you enjoyed it. Next episode, well, that's just going to be plain a surprise. So until next time, folks, this is Shane R. Monroe from Retro Gaming Radio. Until next time, keep it retro.